There you go. Hey, it's Jason. Just gonna do a little bit about reloading. Obviously, my hair needs cut, and well, I kind of look like a slob, but whatever. Anyway, let's get down to business. Let me switch the cameras out of the way and get it so you're not looking at me. Sorry if I get a little bit of a shaky cam there. Anyway, as you can see, I have a few of them, well, all of my calibers lined up actually. I have smallest to biggest, starting with the 45 ACP. Next is the 44 Special, 44 Mag. A lot of difference between those two, honestly. 7.62 by 39. I committed suicide. 12 gauge, of course, the biggest of the bunch as far as diameter. And then, at least as far as length, 300 Winchester Magnum. It's always hard to know where to start as far as videos go. With all the new shooters out there, it's hard to know what they may or may not know. Nothing against anyone, obviously. But just thought I'd kind of start with a few basics, one of which is what I'm talking about right now, which is calibers there. And not only is the caliber the diameter of the bullet, such as 45 in this case, 0.51 if my memory serves right, but close enough. Anyway, but it's also the length of the case. For example, like the 44 Special is a little shorter than the Magnum, as you hopefully can see there. And I do mean a little bit, I think my inch maybe, give or take a little bit. Also, most cases, like for example this 45, the case itself is brass. There, a lot of times you'll hear people call just the case itself brass. That's not totally accurate because, as you can see, like with this 44 Magnum, that's a nickel case, as far as that goes. And with this 7.62 by 39, it's a steel case. The steel ones can't be reloaded, at least as far as I know of. And that's because, at least for one thing, a lot of them are brewed in, primed under the primer, which I kind of show you on this shotgun shell. Only on it, it's the whole thing is what's called a flash hole, and that's, I said to flash, F-L-A-S-H, flash. Anyway, and in a standard case, it'd actually be a little smaller than this, but what's used as the primer is actually the entire flash hole on a 12 gauge, which is kind of interesting. But on something like this steel case, actually has two of them under the primer, from what I can understand. Maybe one of these days I'll cut it apart and look and see. But if my dad says it, it's pretty good odds that it's correct there. So you will not be able to reload anything that is a steel case, as far as that goes, which kind of stinks, because essentially when you go to reload, you have what's called a decapping die, and it punches through the case and knocks out the dead primer. Let me grab one. Just grab a random one here, because they look kind of all the same, but this is what you call your decapping and sizing die. If you look close, you can see the little or pin or whatever you want to call it, actually pushes the dead primers out of the cartridge. So, or case, I suppose I should say more correctly, so that you can eventually put a new primer in and go from there. Also, good thing to have is some sort of reloading manual. Like I have a Nosler number 7, for example. They gave you a lot of good information, some basics about reloading as well, as far as that goes. Like one thing that I found interesting, and move my camera here, but it shows the type of dot presses. Like you'll notice mine and the one in the book are pretty as far as that goes. Essentially, mine's what's called a single stage. They also have what they call turret presses, which kind of rotate as far as that goes, as well as progressive presses. Essentially, the downside of a single stage like I have is it only does one thing at a time. Like it only knocks out the primer. Well, that's kind of a bad example because that's always multiple operation, but it only does one thing at a time. You can't do a whole bunch of steps at once. Like a progressive press will knock out the primer or deprime it or decap it, sometimes they call it, as well as, like putting a primer in another one, as well as putting powder in another one. Probably put in a bullet, things like that. Depends on the actual caliber itself. Also, one thing on cases, some of them, like this one, I'm not sure how well you can see it, but a lot of the Magnum calibers, like the 300 as an example, are what's called belted. And if you look near the end here, about where my thumb is now, right about there, yeah, is what's called a belt. And it's the larger part of the cartridge, at least according to my father, is what's causes it to be sore. So it doesn't go too far into the gun. At least it used to be necessary from what he says. It's not really that necessary on new ones. Also have my shotgun press, as you can see. Brass tumbler, cleans brass, obviously. My reloading bench itself, which is just pine. And mount, of course, my single stage press 2 itself. Obviously, at least single stage presses, you want something fairly substantial, which is why you'll notice I have 4x4 legs on it. There also at least helps you for storage. If I had more room, I really would like a bigger reloading bench, but I don't really have the space as far as that goes. I also have a little measure guide for case lengths. It's kind of a good starting point to check essentially that your case isn't too long, especially on rifle caliber. They get longer over time, believe it or not. Essentially, the metal gets, I guess, hot enough it actually flows or moves and stretches the case over time which, if you're curious and you don't know, is kind of this part that gets smaller right here. Neck. Some people would say it's a rifle cartridge, but you have to be careful with that because there's exceptions. Pistol calibers that do have bottleneck cases, and then also rifle calibers that are what's called straight wall, which means more like this one. In other words, there's no reduction. They're the same diameter at the beginning as they are at the end. And a couple examples for pistol ones. I know, let's see, refresh my memory because I don't remember all of it. Is the 357 SIG. That's a bottlenecked pistol case. There's probably others. An old one. That's what's called an obsolete caliber that probably nobody has heard of other than maybe me and a few others. Is the 256 Winchester Magnum. As far as straight wall cases, the only one, well, I guess there's a few probably, but one I know of right away in the rifle world is the 4570. It's a straight wall case as far as that goes. And essentially, one reason that's important is when you buy your dies, like for example, this is RCBS, as you can see, for the 45 auto or the 45 gap. Apparently it works for more than one caliber, which some of them do. You'll notice, if I can get it open here, that there's 3 dies. There's the decapping and desizing die, essentially knocks out the primer. It also resizes the case. There's the expander die that essentially bells or makes the actual mouth the case bigger. And last but not least is the one where it pushes the bullet in on top of the powder, of course, to seal the case off, so to speak. Whereas if it's a rifle die set, which I have a couple of here, grab the right one. This is for the 7.62 by 39, if you're curious. If I can open it, bear with me. Oh. There's only 2 dies, and that again is the decapper and resizing, which again essentially knocks the old primer out, make sure it's the right size, and then there's the one that actually seats the bullet. There is no expander because in rifle calibers or in bottleneck cases, I suppose, to be exactly precise, there, since like I said, some bottleneck cases, essentially can vary. Some bottleneck cases can be handgun calibers. You don't need to expand it there, whereas a straight wall case you do, such as I showed you a little bit ago. What else? There's all sorts of stuff that you'll need. As far as that goes, the costs can really vary. The press itself, like this one, if you're going to buy one, I would almost recommend a kit. I'm going to be biased and admit my own bias and say that I bought RCBS just because that's what my dad owns. But there's also manufacturers such as Lee, Hornady, Dillon presses are more of the progressive presses, but Dillon Precision presses, I believe, is their whole name. But there's also other ones. I think there was even one by Franklin, which makes my tumbler over there. I'm not familiar with a lot of them. There's also Hornady, which ironically also makes bolts, but they also make a press. I recommend the kits because they come with a few things. Like, for example, mine came with the press. It came with the book there, the Nosler reloading manual. Also came with, let's see, the powder measure, which kind of name implies what it does. It measures powder. And if I remember right, also came with my powder scale. This is a manual powder scale. There's digital ones as well. Another thing you may need as well is what's called a case trimmer. Again, its name pretty much implies what it does. It shortens cases when they get too long, kind of like I was discussing earlier. Also came with a little tool. I don't remember the name right now, but essentially timers in your cases, as far as that goes. And then of course there's all sorts of other things there too, like obviously you'll have to clean your guns, which means cleaning supplies such as rags, some sort of gun cleaning solvent, like Hoppy's number 9, for example. There's other ones too. I'm just showing you what I happen to use or have, or whatever you want to call it. That's at least a few basics. Let me know if you think it was helpful, or if there's something I may need to add. I'm sure I'll probably do a few more of these because there's a lot of information to cover and it's hard to think of everything right away. As far as the kits, like this one, I think, like for the whole thing, I think it was about $200 or $300. You know, so you're talking at least upfront, large investment, shall we say? Yeah. At least with RCBS, you also get a free sticker. Woo! I put it on my reloading bench just for kicks and giggles, because I know I'm 12, but whatever. And also came with a little pad to help lube your cases, because essentially the dies are very tight, which they have to be, so you have to make sure you get them lubed properly, which is more important on your bottleneck cases, such as this one. These ones are really fussy. If you get too much lube, you'll actually indent the shoulder right up here, which isn't really a good thing. Essentially, every time the metal flexes, whatever it is, whether it be brass or nickel or whatever else they come up with, essentially it wears it, and eventually the cases will do what my dad calls fails. In other words, they'll split or something of that nature. So that's another thing you have to watch for when you reload is failures, as he calls them. I call them that because I don't know anything better. Also, you get a little loading block, holds 50 cases. As far as that goes, if you have more than 50, of course, you just have to load up the first 50 and then empty it, and then just keep further later. Also, you'll probably need some sort of ammo box. Like I have several like this is for the 12 gauge, obviously. I have some for the 44. The 300's kind of sitting over there. As far as that goes, each case usually, or cartridge, since the entire thing is called cartridge, meaning the case, the bullet, the powder inside of it, which you can't really see, of course, and then, of course, the lovely primer at the end. If you're not used to it, although I would think most people know it, when a gun shoots, the firing pin hits the primer ignites the powder inside through, like I say, the flash hole. Yes, I know some of you are getting a laugh out of that word, but whatever. And then eventually, although it usually only takes a few seconds or less, it pushes the bullet, of course, down here, out the cartridge, and down the barrel. Or in case of the shotgun, it's a little more complicated. There's still the powder at the bottom, and then grab me one thing here. There's what's called the wad, and under, see, like right here where the primer is roughly, and then the powder is in there, and so the powder pushes the entire wad out, and then the top of the wad is where you have like your buckshot or your BBs or whatever else. As far as that goes, I've never reloaded slugs yet for 12 gauge, but you could even go with it for slugs. I'd have to look into that and see all the stuff on that. If you kind of want to see what I'm talking about, bit of a diagram. Here's kind of a diagram of the whole thing is called a shell. The empty ones, though, are called holes, like a ship hole. But at the bottom, like I said, well, there it shows you the primer, powder, the wad. Don't ask me why it's called a wad, but that's what they call it. And then, like I say, the BBs, and then, of course, where it's crimped there to keep it all in, as far as that goes. And shotguns, they're a whole bunch different. There, like you can see, my shotgun press is set up currently. I'm working on 12 gauge rounds right now. Eventually, I'm going to probably shoot some more and go from there. Oh, here's a good example of a hole. See, it's just an empty. I'm not quite sure where they're called holes in the shotgun world, but that's what they're called. Whereas in pistol rifle world, they're usually called cases or brass. Some people want to call them shells. Some people even call them cartridges. To me, the cartridge, like I was saying earlier, is the entire thing, meaning, the whole 9 yards. The case, the primer, powder inside, as well as the bullet. To me, that's the definition of a cartridge. Kind of like for a shotgun, the definition of a shell is the entire thing. Again, the primer, which you'll notice is a lot bigger. The powder, the wad, which you can't really see in there, and then course, where it's crimped here as well. Anyway, let me know what you think. Talk to you later. Bye.